All right, this morning we are going to be studying about Noah. Okay, I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you the lessons that I gained from the study of this book. We're going to take a look at Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to look at verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, and verse 4. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's start with verse 1. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them as wives of all which they chose. Verse 3, and the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And verse 4, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old men of renown. You know, the human race at that time, they had retained much of its early vigor. Man's existence was still measured by the centuries. While the earth displayed some tokens of decay, the face of nature had not been greatly changed. The earth was still rich, still beautiful, and the gifts of God's providence was still evident. The hills were crowned with majestic trees, and its branches were laden with fruits. The vast garden-like plains were clothed with verdure, and sweet with the fragrance of 1,000 flowers. The fruits of the earth were in great variety, and almost without limit. The trees far surpassed in size, perfect in proportion, as now found. Their wood was of fine grain and hard substance, closely resembling stone. Gold, silver, precious stones existed in abundance. You know, when you read Genesis chapter 5, which is the chapter just before this, you will see that at this point in history, 10 generations had passed, from Adam all the way now up to Noah. The earth was still very beautiful. Okay? Humanity, as was mentioned earlier, still retained its early vigor. They were very intelligent in their mind, and they were very strong physically. I would just imagine that they'll be sitting around and they'll be listening to the exact narration of creation, the fall of man, of moving out of Eden, the story of Cain and of Abel, and even the separation of Cain from Adam, God's redemption plan, and how God intended man to be. Just imagine, they didn't have TVs in those days. So when they sit around, what stories would they talk about? They'll talk about Adam's creation stories. They'll talk about things that had happened in the past. They'll talk about how Adam was communicating with God about the fall. This was their gossip. This was their life story. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, we see something different. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, you will see here that there was a separation between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Gradually, the two sides met again. And when they did, the sons of God, referring to Seth's children, who were worshippers and keepers of the law of God, started to look at the daughters of men. That means the daughters of Cain, who were stubborn, who wanted to do things their own way, and of course, they started to follow their own inclination. So when the sons of God, who were big, strong, and mighty, intermarried with the daughters of men, things started to happen. Let's go to the next slide. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. Let's take a look at that one. And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Right after the separation, okay, in the first few verses in chapter 6, you will see a separation between the people of God, the sons of God, and the sons of men. And then later on, they intermarried, right? Sons of God intermarried with the daughters of men. And the next verse, you see what happens? It talks about the evil wickedness of man, right? It talks about how this mixed marriage between the sons of God and the daughters of men increased man's wickedness to such a great point that the Creator said, man, regret I create these people. Okay? in Malay we'll say menyesal, right? How did this even happen? God was thinking. Just recently I read the papers about how this man specifically went into a newspaper office and started killing specific people. We've heard stories before of how high schools, when they had massacres and people were just killed by the hundreds. You think about it, about how people do things in the name of God, or how little children are being destroyed for the pleasure and for the fun seeking of certain people. You think about this, our human mind, we're not even using 10%. Right, doctors? You can testify to this. We're not even using 10%. And yet, the amount of wickedness that we can conceive now, it's so unimaginable. Just think about it. Men in the olden days who were bigger, physically stronger, and they were using almost the full mental capacity of the mind. Can you imagine how cunning they will be? How they can, now we're talking about our ex-political leaders, how they can come up with excuses justifying their wrong. Can you imagine if these particular people are using less than 10%, how people who are using more than 10% or maybe up to 90% of their brain can justify the wrong that they're doing? Can you imagine the kind of wickedness that they can conceive? The thoughts, their minds. Sometimes when you look at little children, when they say things to us, it's like, I never even thought of that. Because the way they think is different. But they're not even using 10%. And can you imagine these wicked people who are using more than 10%? The kind of lies or the kind of cunning fables they can come up with. Now, let's turn to Genesis chapter 6, verse 7. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 7. And let's do a comparison here. Verse 7. And the Lord said, I will destroy men whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And then in verse 8, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Yet Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah must have done something right, something that made his life a pleasure or pleasing to the eyes of the Lord. Because on one hand, God said, I'm going to destroy not only human beings, but every creeping thing, every beast on the earth. And on the other side, he says to Noah, you have found favor in me, and you have found grace in me. When I was thinking about this, I was just thinking about Revelation 14. Okay, we go back to the last book of the Bible, Revelation 14. And we're going to see a familiar text which our church is founded upon. Revelation 14, and we're going to read verse 6, verse 7, verse 9, and verse 10. Okay? Revelation 14, verse 6, 7, 9, and 10. In verse 6, it says, And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him that made the heaven, the earth, and the sea, and the fountains of waters. We jump over to verse 9 and 10. Verse 9, And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand. Verse 10, The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation, and he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. In Genesis, God judged people during Noah's time. He judged not only their thoughts, their imaginations, but also their wicked actions. In Revelation, in the third angel's message, God will also judge a people. He will judge them based on the fact that whether they receive the mark of the beast on their foreheads or in their hands. Similarly, these two people did two things. Number one, they made a choice. Number two, they acted out the decisions. And finally, the end was the result of whether they or not they were safe or not. When I see these similarities between Noah and our time, I thought, maybe it's good to study this. Maybe it's good to see what privileges Noah had, what privileges we have in our time, and see what we can learn from this. So this morning, the remaining part of this morning, we are going to study 3 points, 3 simple points about Noah's life, the people in Noah's time and compare it to our life and the people in our time, as well as the decisions that we're going to make. Right? So I've actually categorized it into 3 different sections. The first one is privilege to listen. Second one is privilege to choose. And the third one is privilege to give. And trust me, when you see the study, you will see that, man, we are the luckiest people alive on this earth. Or maybe we're not. Point number 1, privilege to listen. Okay? Now, this actually comes from Genesis chapter 5. We go back again to the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 5, and we'll be able to see from chapter 5 the genealogy, and I actually calculated Earth's history from here. My maths, boleh pakai lah, can use, but not exactly the best. My graph, even worse. But in a simple depiction, what I figured out is that, you know what? These people were really, really very blessed. Now, I'm not going to read all the text, but I'm just going to tell you where I found it from. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, you will see that Adam lived 130 years, and then he begat his son Seth. And the days of Adam were 930 years. So what I've actually done is this. Okay? This is Adam. This line here refers to 0 years. Every line after that is about 100 years each. It's not exact. Okay? It's not exact, so don't calculate and everything, say your math's off lah. I know it's off, but it's not exact. But you see, when Adam was born, when Adam gave birth to Seth, he was about 100 plus years old. Okay? And this whole line here, from here until here, is about 900 plus. Okay? So that's how long Adam lived. So verse 6, you will see how long Seth lived. He gave birth to Enos. No, his wife gave birth to Enos at 105 years. Okay? So that line again there is 100. Okay? This line here is 100 when Seth gave birth to Enos. Okay? So do you see the train of thoughts that I'm going at? Does it make sense? Ken? I see yawning mouth, I see nodding heads, but generally, does it make sense? Okay? You understand, right? So basically, when you look at Genesis chapter 5, you will see that most of these people, they live almost up to 1,000 years, with Methuselah living 969 years, right? You will see that at the point in time when Noah was born, he actually had all these people still alive. Lamech was still alive, Methuselah was still alive, Enoch probably had just left. If my maths is correct, Enoch would have already left the earth during that time. But Methuselah is Enoch's son. Methuselah can actually see what's going on in Enoch's life. And before that, all these people who were alive, they sat at Adam and Seth's feet. Meaning, when Adam and Seth were alive telling the stories, these people were alive to listen. Okay? These people living during Noah's time. Now, of course, when Noah was born, some of the people were already born before him, right? He didn't just come into an empty earth. So when Noah was born, there were people alive around with him. And they would have heard stories directly from Adam, from Seth, from Enos, from Canaan, from Mahalalel, from Jared, from Enoch, from Methuselah. They would have heard stories directly from them. I mean, most of us here would have known, of course we'll know our parents, but we have known our grandparents. Some of us even have the privilege of knowing our great-grandparents. And some of them were alive during the Japanese occupation, right? And we would have heard stories from them. My grandmother tells us stories about Japanese occupation all the time when she was alive. And you can imagine what they went through. And that's what happened to the people during Noah's time. They heard stories from all these people. Can you imagine speaking to the very person who was in the presence of God, who was created by God himself? Of course, remember, Eve was also still alive during this time. Okay? Now, this is what they had. They had the privilege to listen to people who were there in God's presence. The people of Noah had a prophet in their midst. Not only that, they had Noah to tell them exactly what God was telling them. Now, remember we learned that earlier on that these men on this time, what did they have? They have physical strength and they had the early vigor of men, right? That means they were perfect in their ways. Their brains, how many percent? More than 10%, close to 100. And so when these people were telling their stories, how much do you think they remembered? Oh, they probably remembered it word for word. They did not need iPhone ka, whatever phone ka, don't need any pad ka. They just used their brains. From the mouth spoken from these people who were directly in working with God, talking to God, they just used their brains, they remembered. And their ears, no heart of hearing. Mother calls, they answer. No need to wait ma, okay? But they had perfect hearing. And with their perfect hearing, they can record everything that's being said. I would imagine they probably had photographic memory. They remembered everything, word for word. And it was easy for them to transmit it down to the other person because got no Facebook ka, Twitter ka, no Instagram ka, everything was transmitted because they had a perfect mind. Okay? Now, when you read in Genesis chapter 6 verse 2, when there was a dividing line between the sons of God and the daughters of men, Adam, who was first created man, would have surely told his children. And they had the privilege of listening to this directly from Adam. All these people. And these people, even though they didn't have the privilege from listening from Adam, they listened to Seth. And their minds were still capable of absorbing all these things. If not, how else would Noah find favor with God? How else would he know how to live a perfect and righteous God that God could give grace to? Because he learned from all these people who were still alive when he was alive. Right? As the judgment drew near, God raised a prophet. And that prophet was Noah himself. And Noah told them, judgment is coming, the flood is coming. But they did not listen. For 120 years, Noah spoke, and evidence was seen in the earth. And finally, when the animals were marching into the ark, they chose not to listen. These people had the privilege to listen, but they did not. In our day, we don't have Adam, we don't have Seth, we don't have Enos, we don't have Canaan. But we have a prophetess just as well. We have Mrs. White. And in Revelations 1 verse 7, it tells us that the sealed book has been unsealed for us. We have the spirit of prophecy, we have these writings. In fact, we even have the full revelation of the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation at our fingertips. And the best part is, you can probably get most of these things free of charge. Just Google. Okay? Now, let's go on to the next one. In Proverbs 29 verse 18, turn with me to Proverbs 29 verse 18. And I'm going to show you something there in Proverbs 29 verse 18. Okay? Proverbs 29 verse 18, it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. But he that keepeth the law, happy is he. You know, we have in our midst a prophet who was in the very presence of God. In vision, she spoke to God, she listened to God. The Bible says that if we don't want to perish, we had better be listening to her words. Right? Now turn with me now to Matthew 24, verse 37, 38, and 39. Matthew chapter 24, verse 37, 38, and 39. Okay? Matthew chapter 24, verse 37. For as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days they were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. And they knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall the coming of the Son of Man be. Had the antediluvians believed the warning and repented of their evil deeds, the Lord would have turned aside his wrath as he later did for Nineveh. In spite of the privilege of listening to their fathers, Adam, Seth, Enoch, and Methuselah, telling them exactly what is going to happen in the beginning, in spite of having the privilege of listening to Noah preach to them for 120 years, in spite of knowing what God's expectations are of them, they still failed. out of God's love for us, He has given us a prophet in Mrs. Ellen G. White. And she has instruction for us not only what to eat, what to drink, what to dress, but she even tells us how to spend our time. Instructions for our last day people. Knowing what is coming up next, He gave us instructions on how to live a happy life, on how to have a happy family, on how to build a happy society. Are we listening to her? Or are we trying to fill up the measure of our own iniquity till we become ripe for destruction? So what was point number 1? The people of Noah had the privilege to listen. Okay, let's go to point number 2. Point number 2 is found in Genesis chapter 6, verse 11 to 13. Okay, Genesis chapter 6, verse 11 to 13. So we're going back again to the beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 6, verse 11 to 13. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. 13. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. What violence was going on? What was the corrupted way that was upon the earth? What did they do that made God himself, who is by nature love in himself, say that he would destroy the whole earth? We're going to take a look at 5 things. God bestowed upon the antediluvians many rich gifts, okay? But they used these gifts of bounties to glorify themselves, turned them into a curse. Hello? Okay. By fixing their affections upon earthly things. You know, they employed gold and silver and precious stones and choice wood in the construction and habitations for themselves, and endeavored to excel one another in beautifying their dwellings. They sought only to gratify the desires of their own proud hearts, and reveled in scenes of pleasure and wickedness. Think about this. We may not have a physical big home that we want to decorate with gold and with silver and whatever nots. But what are our values? Okay? What choices are we making as we are building a home? What choices are we making as we choose our career, our studies, our friends we choose to spend time with, or even what we choose to eat and drink? What is our priority? Okay? So the first one is, they sought to gratify the desires of their own heart. The second one, they did not retain God in their knowledge. Okay? It says here, not referring to the antediluvians, not desiring to retain God in their knowledge, they soon came to deny his existence. They adored nature in the place of the God of nature. They glorified human genius. Oh, this person is so smart, that person is so smart. They worshipped the works of their own hand and taught their children to bow down to graven images. Now, are we doing all we can to remember God in our lives? Or are we like the antediluvians, choosing to gratify our own desires? Nobody understands the stress that I'm going through during the week, so I can't join prayer meeting. I need to catch up a lot of missing study time from missing on Sabbath, so I've got to study and I can't join prayer meeting. I don't have time for Sabbath afternoon studies. You know how tired I've been during the week? I deserve to sleep. You know, every minute that we are living, we are breathing, we are actually have an opportunity to either retain God in our image or to retain something else. Our choices are seen by all. Children can see the very things that parents are doing. You want to know what's going on at home? You go speak to the little children. They'll tell you, my mommy did this, my mommy did that. You know, they'll tell you things that's going on that sometimes like, oh, okay, you know. And the children, they see what the parents do, and by watching how the parents make priorities, they decide, oh, this is what mommy and daddy's priority is, right? For us, youth, I'm still youth. For us, youth, the younger people are looking at us. How do we spend our time? Who are our friends? What are our priorities? We may think that, okay, at a certain stage, at a certain age, I'll change, and when I have kids, then I'll behave better. We may think that we can do this and we can automatically just change just like that. But we can't, because the very things that we dwell upon, we are entrenched with. Do you think Belsi and Audra can immediately stop canvassing? They can't. It's in their blood, you know? And if they have never done it, the next day, when the kids are growing up and they start talking about it, they'll be able to talk it because it's something that's in them, something that they're doing day in and day out. What you do day in and day out, what you keep in your mind, what you watch, what you hear on the car radio music, that is what is going in your mind. Whose image are you retaining? The image of your friends that you talk about? The image of the God that loves you? Or maybe it's the image of that old devilish boss that keeps making your life difficult. The third part, they put God out and worship creatures. Men put God out of their knowledge and worship the creatures of their own imagination. And as a result, they became more and more debased. It is the law of human mind that by beholding, we become changed. Man will rise no higher than his conceptions of truth, purity, and holiness. If the mind is never exalted above the level of humanity, if it is not uplifted by faith to contemplate infinite wisdom and love, the man will be constantly seeking lower and lower and lower. Who are we beholding in our free time? Whom do we enjoy talking to? Whom do we consult with? Whom do we trust? You know, it's just so, I think, planned that the clip that we were showing just now is all talking about, what was that? Legions, right? It was all talking about these people choosing to fellowship time together. And in my text, I actually have here, whom do you enjoy spending time with? Tell me. Just tell me honestly, when you come to church, do you feel automatically glued to everybody here? No, right? In your mind, you're thinking, man, why is this person talking so much? Or, man, why does she dress like that? We have preconceptions, we have ideas that we're not really that ngam with the person sitting next to us. It happens because we don't spend that much time with them. The more you spend time with them, the more you gel with them, the more you get more comfortable. Yes, at first there's friction and there's problems and stuff like that. But that's how life is. Do you think two people can just meet together and get married without having fights? No, right? Okay. Now, in our presence, we may feel a sense of awkwardness with the people around us. But are these people drawing us to Christ? And if they are, and we feel awkward, we need to make a decision. We have a choice to find who our associates are. My sister has got no choice. She's born to a family and I'm the older sister. My brother has no choice. My mom, she could have chosen, but she wouldn't know what kind of daughter I'll come up with. But our friends that we choose in, the friends that we associate with, we can choose. Are these friends influencing us to bring us closer to God or not? Are these friends influencing our thoughts and our conscience to have a higher level of purity or not? The fourth point, God gave His commandments as a rule of life, but His law was transgressed, and every conceivable sin was the result. The wickedness of men was open and daring. Justice was trampled, and the dust and cries of the oppressed reached all the way up to heaven. When we choose not to retain God in our minds, but retain other things like TV shows, news happenings, or drama of our own life, without realizing this, we are dwelling and beholding upon these things, and we become changed into these things. If we keep company with friends who have sinful human attributes and passions, we will degrade ourselves to a level of wickedness like those in the days of Noah. Think about it. During Noah's time, they had 100 years to live out their sinful wants and desires. And the more time they had, the more chances they could outdo each other. Oh, you can have 4 wives, I can have 8. You can have 8 wives, I can have 12. They can outdo each other because they live so long. You know? And that's how they became so corrupted to the extent that God wanted to destroy them. Given the chance, would we also live equally corrupted lives like the people of Noah? You know, in the people of Noah's time, there was no restraint. Whoever coveted the wives of another person or the possessions of his neighbors will take it by force. Men exulted in their deeds of violence. They delighted in destroying the life of animals, and the use of flesh for food rendered them more cruel and bloodthirsty, until they came to disregard human life with an astonishing indifference. Genesis chapter 6, verse 17 and verse 18. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 17 and verse 18. And behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. Verse 18. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into thine ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. Now, let me show you this. Amid the prevailing corruption, that was going on during Noah's time, Methuselah, Noah, and many others labored to keep alive the knowledge of God, the true God, and stay the tide of moral evil. Enoch had repeated this to his children. Methuselah has also told this to his sons, and they lived to hear the preaching of Noah. These were the people that assisted in the building of the ark. These people had the privilege to choose, and they chose wisely. They chose to build the ark and to be safe. Question: which category are we in? Just because we don't take things by force, just because we don't exult in the deeds of violence, it doesn't mean that we're not like the antediluvians. What seemingly small decision are we making, and is that leading us towards God or the opposite direction? The issue is this. It is the small little things, the small choices that we make. This is giving evidence to the priority in our lives. And even though we don't see it, these choices influences our life for eternity. We have the privilege to choose. Did I go up or go down? Okay. The third point is the privilege to give. Okay, we're going to find in Genesis chapter 6, verse 8, verse 9, 18, and 22. Okay, Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. Okay, we're going to talk about Noah now and what privilege he had. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. Look at the Bible, not me. Okay, Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. All right, and verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations, and Noah walked with God. And then we jump to verse 18. But with thee will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee. And verse 22. Thus did Noah, according to all that the Lord, that God commanded him, so did he. In the days of Noah, there was an overwhelming majority that opposed the truth. The land was filled with violence. War, crime, murder was the order of the day. It's not just something that happened once in a while like World War I, World War II, but it was the order of the day. So it will be just before Christ's second coming. The sin of the antediluvians was in perverting that which in itself was lawful. The antediluvians were slaves of Satan, led and controlled by him. However, it says that Noah walked with God. Think about it. Noah could have just said, I'll mind my own business, I'll just do my own thing, I won't even be bothered with them. Really? It says here, all the antediluvian people, they were slaves of Satan, led and controlled by him. Do you think they would have left Noah alone, even if Noah wasn't preaching? Do you think they would have let Noah build his own vineyard, plant his own trees, live in his own little corner? Do you think they would not have gone and see those big fat grapes and grab it? Do you think that this antediluvians would not have saw what Noah had, coveted it, and taken it by force? In SDA Bible Commentary 1090.5, it states that the antediluvians, worshipped selfish indulgence, eating, drinking, merrymaking, and resorting to acts of violence and crime was if their desires and passion were interfered with. Even if Noah was not participating in all these negative things that these people were doing, if they were to see the good things that Noah had, they would have taken it by force for themselves. Okay? Genesis chapter 6, verse 13 and 14. Genesis chapter 6, verse 13 and 14. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." Verse 14. "Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch." It was because Noah walked with God that God told him what would happen to the earth. And because of this task of building the ark, Noah had the privilege to give to the ministry. And in giving to the ministry, he saved his and his family's life. Families, what privilege has God given to you? Are you privileged to host care group? Are you privileged to cook fellowship lunch, even though sometimes your food may not be eaten by the unthankful youth? Are you privileged to host youth who have no place to stay over the weekends? Are you privileged to stay back on Sabbath afternoons so that your children can get used to studying the Bible? Youth, what privilege has God given to you? Privilege to drive around and pick people up? Privilege to meet with seekers for dinner? Privilege to mingle with seekers during campus hop outings? Your faith, your belief in God is seen in how, for the sake of His kingdom, you are doing something. You are giving something. You know, while Noah was giving his warning message to the world, his works testified of his sincerity. It was thus that his faith was made perfect. He gave the world an example of believing just what God says, and all that he possessed, he invested into the ark. For 120 years, God sent people warnings through his servant Noah, but they used the provision so graciously granted them in ridiculing Noah. They caricatured him, they criticized him, they laughed at him for his peculiar earnestness and intense feeling in regard to the judgments which he declared God would surely fulfill. They talked of science and the laws controlling nature. Then they held a carnival over the words of Noah, calling him a crazy fanatic. 120 years before the flood. And if Noah was not involved in building the ark, if he chose to be a bystander, do you think he would be safe? Think about Lot. Was Lot practicing Sodom in Sodom and Gomorrah? He was not. He was not doing anything wrong. But what happened to his family? Everyone except for his 2 daughters were safe. When you have a privilege to give something to God, that is the way that God is using you to save you. Men, priest of the household, your faith must be seen in your giving. What are you giving to? Where are you spending your time and your efforts? Is your faith made evident by the choice you make? Are you investing in earthly things to beautify your house? Or are you investing in the refinement of your character? Investing in your spouse by giving her kind and loving words. Investing in your home by ensuring that it's a homey home, a helpful home, a loving home. Are you helping to prepare your family for eternity? Youth, what are we investing in? Yes, we got not a ton of money. Yes, we don't have our own family. But what about our time, our energy? Where are we spending it? How are we spending it? But as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. So as the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. You know, humanity is making one big circle. The wickedness of the earth is coming to the point like in the days of Noah. And just as in the days of Noah, people were eating and drinking and giving in marriage and marrying, life is as usual, so God's people are doing the same thing now. But I appeal to you this morning, just as in the days of Noah, the people had the privilege to listen, the privilege to choose, and the privilege to give. Instead of seeking out our own entertainment, find with your free time, listen to sermons, read good books, draw yourself closer to God so you can listen. You have the privilege to listen to His word. Instead of choosing to worship or do things that you want to do, make a choice to build your life up for eternity. Instead of focusing on material, build your life up for something that cannot be destroyed by this earth. Instead of focusing on temporal gain, put your mind in a place where God can use it. Instead of giving your life to earthly pleasures, make sacrifices of your own pride, your time, and even your finances. Give to the cause of God. Make a decision to use this privilege of giving so that in giving, who knows, you might save not only your own soul, but the soul of your family. AOI 2018 is coming up. It's a place where you can listen to good sermons being heard. You will hear the preaching of God's word from people who have experienced God in a way that we probably could have never experienced before. You have families who have been through difficult times and coming out of it, starting in their own family ministry. You have a man who literally memorized the whole Bible going to speak to us at AOI. We have the privilege to listen. At AOI 2018, from August 29 to September the 2nd, we have a choice that we can make. A choice to choose to say, God, yes, I'm having my exams just right around the corner, but I choose to make you my priority. At AOI 2018, we can say, yes, I've got a lot of work to do, but did we take time off annual leave to go on holiday? Can we not take time off to go to AOI? Can we not make a choice to say, God, I put you as my priority? At AOI 2018, we have a chance to give. There are some youth who may not have the money to pay for their accommodation, but I know some families have opened their house allowing youth to stay there for free. This chance to give is not just for the saving of your own souls, but that of your children or of people looking out from before you. They will see from the choices that you make, the priorities that you put in place, that this is what is important in our life. And from then we will know that we have made a choice. In the time when Noah was corrupted, we are making a choice to come closer to God. As I close this morning, my prayer is that for our little church here, we will choose to listen. We will choose to make this decision. We will choose to give, to come, to make the sacrifices necessary for AOI 2018. Shall we pray? Father in heaven, as we just sang in the song, you have suffered so much for us. You have given so much for us. You have left the whole of heaven just to be with us and to give us a second chance at life. And we have this privilege, just like those of Noah, to listen to your word. We have this privilege to choose you over the temporal things in our life. We have this privilege, dear Father, to give the little that we have. And in doing so, it's not a burden, but it's something that will save our own souls. And Father, I pray that as we go home this afternoon, or as we stay back for afternoon study, we'll make choices this coming week that will draw us closer to you. Choices that prove not only to our family, for our children, but to our neighbors and our relatives, that we really earnestly, in spite of our weaknesses, want to be like you. I pray that you will seal this in our hearts, that we will make a decision for you, and we will draw closer to you in every little step that we make. For this I pray in Jesus' name.